The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered for the changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Victoria Ashworth, a woman whose expensive handbag and designer clothes immediately set her apart from the crowd. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against her phone screen as she checked her social media followers for the 100th time that morning. Victoria had flown to London from New York just 3 days ago, not for the culture or history, but because her wealthy friends had been posting pictures from their European vacations, and she couldn't bear to be left out. Money had never been an issue for her. Her late father's tech company had left her with more wealth than she could spend in several lifetimes. But it had also left her with something else, a deep emptiness that no amount of luxury could fill. As she pushed through the crowd, Victoria's designer heels clicked against the ancient stones. She held her phone high, trying to get the perfect selfie with the palace guards in the background. The red-uniformed guards stood perfectly still, their tall black hats making them look like toy soldiers from a distance. But Victoria wanted more than a distant shot. She wanted something that would get thousands of likes, something that would make her friends back home jealous of her exclusive London experience. "Excuse me," she said loudly, elbowing past a family with young children who had been waiting patiently for over an hour. The father looked at her with surprise, but Victoria barely noticed. She was used to getting her way, and politeness had never been something she worried about. Her wealth had always opened doors and moved people aside. The guard she approached was named James Morrison, though none of the tourists knew his name. To them, he was just part of the scenery, a living statue in a red coat. But James was much more than that. At 28 years old, he had served in the British Army for 8 years, including 2 difficult tours in Afghanistan. He had joined the prestigious Queen's Guard only 6 months ago, and the position meant everything to him. James came from a working-class family in Manchester. His father had been a factory worker, and his mother cleaned offices at night to help pay the bills. When James was 12, his younger sister Sarah had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. The family had struggled not just emotionally, but financially, as they tried to get her the best possible care. James had watched his parents work extra jobs, sell their car, and eventually take out loans just to pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Sarah had survived, thanks to the sacrifices her family made, but the experience had taught James the value of service and dedication. He had joined the army partly to serve his country, but also to support his family financially. Every month, he sent half of his salary home to help his parents, who were now caring for his aging grandmother as well. Standing guard required incredible discipline. James had trained for months to maintain perfect posture for hours at a time, to ignore distractions, and to represent the dignity and honor of the British monarchy. The tourists often tried to make the guards laugh, break their concentration, or get them to move. Most were harmless and even respectful, understanding that they were witnessing a tradition that went back centuries. But Victoria was different. As she approached James, her phone camera was already recording. She wanted to create content that would go viral, something that would shock her followers and get her the attention she craved. She had seen videos online of tourists interacting with the guards, and she wanted to create something even more dramatic. "Hey, guard guy," she called out, standing directly in front of James. Her voice was loud enough that other tourists began to notice. "I want to take a picture with you. Move over here." She gestured dismissively, as if James were a piece of furniture she could rearrange. James remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead. His training had prepared him for this. Tourists often made requests or tried to get reactions, but his job was to maintain his post with dignity and professionalism. He could see Victoria in his peripheral vision, could hear the entitled tone in her voice, but he didn't move a muscle. Victoria's frustration grew quickly. She wasn't used to being ignored, and certainly not by someone she considered to be essentially a servant. In her world, money talked, and everyone listened. She stepped closer to James, her phone still recording. "I'm talking to you," she said, her voice getting sharper. "Do you know who I am? I have 3 million followers on Instagram. This could be great publicity for you people." She waved her hand vaguely at the palace behind her, as if she were offering them a favor. Still, James didn't respond. His breathing remained steady, his posture perfect. Inside his mind, he was thinking about his training, about the pride he felt in wearing the uniform, about the trust that had been placed in him. He was also thinking about his family, about the sacrifices they had made, and about how important this job was to him. He wouldn't let some entitled tourist make him break his discipline. Other tourists had begun to gather around, sensing that something interesting was happening. Some were taking pictures and videos of their own, though they seemed more interested in watching the interaction than participating in it. A few looked uncomfortable with Victoria's behavior, but nobody said anything. Victoria's face was getting red with anger and embarrassment. She could see people watching, could see their phones pointed in her direction. This wasn't going the way she had planned. She was supposed to be the star of this moment, not some stubborn guard who wouldn't even acknowledge her presence. "Fine," she said, stepping even closer to James. "If you want to play statue, I'll treat you like one." Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped James across the face. The sound echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The crowd gasped collectively, and several people shouted in shock and anger. James's head snapped slightly to the side from the force of the blow, but he quickly returned to his original position. His cheek was red and stinging, but his expression remained neutral. Inside, his mind was racing, but his training held firm. Victoria seemed surprised by her own action for a moment, but then her anger took over completely. The slap hadn't gotten her the reaction she wanted. James still stood there, still ignored her, still made her feel small and powerless despite all her wealth and supposed importance. "You think you're so special, don't you?" she screamed at him. "Standing there in your little costume, pretending to be important. You're nothing but a toy soldier, a puppet for tourists to look at." Her voice was getting higher and more hysterical with each word. The crowd around them was growing larger and more agitated. Several people were shouting at Victoria to stop, to leave the guard alone. Someone called out that they were calling the police. But Victoria was beyond caring about consequences. All her life, her money had protected her from the results of her actions. She had never learned that some things couldn't be bought or bullied. James could feel the situation escalating, but he also felt something else. Despite the humiliation and anger he was experiencing, he felt a deep sadness for this woman who was so clearly lost and desperate for attention. His training had taught him to see beyond the surface, to understand that people who lashed out were often in pain themselves. Then, Victoria did something that shocked everyone, including herself. In a moment of pure rage and frustration, she gathered saliva in her mouth and spat directly at James's face. The spit hit his cheek and began to slowly drip down toward his uniform collar. The crowd erupted in outrage. Several tourists started moving toward Victoria, shouting at her to stop. Others were frantically taking pictures and videos, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. A few people called for security, demanding that Victoria be arrested immediately. But James Morrison did something that nobody expected. Instead of maintaining his rigid posture, instead of continuing to ignore the woman who had just assaulted and humiliated him in front of hundreds of people, he slowly turned his head to look directly at Victoria. His eyes weren't filled with anger or hatred, as everyone expected. Instead, there was something much more powerful there, a deep compassion and understanding that seemed to see right through Victoria's wealth and arrogance to the broken person underneath. "Are you all right, miss?" James asked quietly, his voice so gentle that only Victoria and a few people nearby could hear him. "You seem like you're having a very difficult day." Victoria stared at him in complete shock. This wasn't the reaction she had expected or wanted. She had been prepared for anger, for retaliation, for confirmation that she was important enough to break this man's professional composure. Instead, she found herself looking into the eyes of someone who seemed to genuinely care about her well-being, despite what she had just done to him. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. It was a feeling she had buried so deep under designer clothes and expensive vacations that she had almost forgotten it existed. It was shame, real shame, not the social embarrassment she usually worried about, but a deep recognition of how far she had fallen from the person she could have been. The crowd around them had gone quiet, sensing that something important was happening, though they couldn't quite understand what it was. James slowly raised his hand and wiped the spit from his face with a handkerchief, but his eyes never left Victoria's face. "I'm sorry that you're in so much pain," he continued, his voice still gentle but now loud enough for more people to hear. "Whatever has happened to make you feel like you need to hurt other people, I'm truly sorry you're going through that." Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She had prepared for many possible reactions to her behavior: anger, retaliation, even legal consequences. But she had never prepared for kindness, for someone to see past her actions to the hurt that drove them. Tears began to form in her eyes, and For the first time since she was a child, Victoria Ashworth felt truly seen by another human being. Not for her money, not for her social media following, not for her designer clothes, but for who she really was underneath all of that, a lonely, scared woman who had lost her way. The moment stretched on, with hundreds of tourists watching in fascination as one of the most unexpected scenes in Royal Guard history continued to unfold. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. James could see the change happening in Victoria's eyes, could see the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. His training as a soldier had taught him to recognize when someone was surrendering, when the fight had gone out of them. But this was different. This wasn't defeat. It was the beginning of something that might eventually become healing. Victoria's hands began to shake as the full weight of what she had done hit her. She had assaulted a man who was just doing his job, a man who had shown her nothing but dignity and respect even when she had given him every reason to respond with anger. She had humiliated herself and embarrassed her country in front of hundreds of strangers. And all for what? A few minutes of attention from people she didn't even know? The security guards were approaching now, having been called by concerned tourists. Victoria could see them moving through the crowd toward her, and she knew her actions would have consequences. But for the first time in years, she didn't try to think of ways her money could make the problem disappear. Instead, she found herself thinking about the man standing in front of her, the man whose kindness had just shattered every wall she had built around her heart. The security guards reached the scene just as Victoria's tears began to fall freely. Chief Security Officer David Thompson had been monitoring the situation from the palace's security room, watching the drama unfold on multiple camera feeds. He had seen countless incidents over his 15 years of service, but nothing quite like this. Usually, when tourists misbehaved, it was a simple matter of removing them from the premises and filing a report. But the guard's unexpected response had changed everything. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," Officer Thompson said firmly but professionally as he approached Victoria. His colleagues flanked him, ready to escort her away from the crowd. The standard procedure was clear. Assault on a royal guard was a serious offense that would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Victoria looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some showed anger and disgust at her behavior. Others displayed curiosity about what would happen next, and a few seemed to reflect the same compassion she had seen in James's eyes. She nodded slowly, understanding that she had to face the consequences of her actions. "Wait," James said, stepping forward. This broke another protocol. Guards were not supposed to intervene in security matters. "Sir, if I may speak with you privately for a moment?" Officer Thompson frowned. In all his years of service, he had never had a guard make such a request after being assaulted. The proper procedure was for the guard to return to his post, while security handled the incident. But something in James's tone made him pause. "Guard Morrison, return to your position." "We'll handle this matter," Thompson replied. But James shook his head gently. "Sir, I understand the protocols, but this situation is different. Please, just one moment." James's voice carried a quiet authority that came from his military experience. He had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes following orders blindly could miss opportunities for better solutions. Thompson looked between James and Victoria, who was still crying silently. The crowd watched with intense interest, their phones capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. After a brief hesitation, Thompson nodded and stepped aside with James. "What she did was wrong," James said quietly. "But I don't think arresting her will solve anything. She needs help, not punishment. I've seen that look before, sir, in soldiers who were broken inside, who acted out because they didn't know how else to deal with their pain." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Guard Morrison, this woman assaulted you. She spat on you in front of hundreds of witnesses. The law is clear about what happens next." "The law is important," James agreed. "But sometimes mercy is more powerful than justice. I'm not pressing charges, sir. I'm asking for permission to handle this differently. You realize this could affect your career? Your position here?" Thompson asked, genuinely concerned for the young guard's future. James glanced back at Victoria, who was watching their conversation with desperate hope in her eyes. "Some things are more important than career advancement, sir. This woman is clearly suffering. Maybe this incident could be the wake-up call she needs to get her life back on track." Officer Thompson had dealt with hundreds of security incidents, but he had never encountered a guard who responded to assault with such compassion. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at Victoria's tear-streaked face, and made a decision that went against every protocol he had been trained to follow. 5 minutes, he said to James. You have 5 minutes to resolve this. And then, we follow standard procedures if she doesn't cooperate fully. James nodded and walked back to Victoria, who was now surrounded by curious onlookers, but being given space by the other security officers. The crowd was completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. What's your name? James asked gently, his formal guard demeanor replaced by the warmth of someone who genuinely cared. Victoria, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria Ashworth. She paused, then added, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I accept your apology, Victoria, James said simply. But I think you owe yourself an apology too. What happened here today? This isn't who you really are, is it? Victoria shook her head, fresh tears flowing. I don't know who I really am anymore. I haven't known for a long time. She looked around at all the people watching her, their phones recording her breakdown, and felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, she was being completely honest. My father died 2 years ago, she continued, her voice getting stronger. He left me everything, his company, his money, his properties. But he never taught me how to be a good person. He was always working, always busy, and I learned that the only way to get attention was to act out, to be dramatic, to make people notice me. The crowd around them had grown larger, but somehow it felt like an intimate conversation between just the two of them. James listened without judgment, his experience with troubled soldiers helping him understand the pain behind her words. After he died, I had all this money but no purpose, Victoria went on. I travel constantly, buy anything I want, have millions of followers who like my pictures, but I've never felt so empty in my life. Today, when you ignored me, it reminded me of how my father used to ignore me, and I lost control. Money can't buy happiness, James said quietly, but it can buy opportunities to help others. Have you ever considered using your resources to make a difference in someone else's life? Victoria looked confused. What do you mean? James thought about his sister Sarah, about the medical bills his family had struggled to pay, about all the families who faced similar challenges without the resources to get help. There are people in this world who are fighting battles you can't imagine. Children who need medical care their families can't afford. Parents who work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Veterans who served their country and came home to find themselves forgotten and alone. You could help them, James continued. You have something most people will never have, the power to change lives with just a signature on a check. Instead of using your wealth to get attention for yourself, you could use it to shine light on people who really need to be seen. Victoria stared at him, this man she had assaulted and humiliated, who was now offering her a path to redemption. Why are you helping me? After what I did to you, why aren't you angry? James smiled, the first smile he had shown during the entire incident. My sister almost died of cancer when she was 13. My family went through hell trying to save her, not just emotionally, but financially. We were lucky. We found a way to get her the treatment she needed. But I met other families in the hospital who weren't so lucky. I learned that suffering doesn't make people bad. It just makes them desperate. You're not a bad person, Victoria, he added. You're just a person who's lost her way. But lost doesn't mean gone forever. It just means you need help finding the right direction. Officer Thompson checked his watch and approached them again. The 5 minutes were up, and he needed to make a decision. The crowd was getting restless, and he could see more security personnel arriving to help control the situation. Well, Thompson asked James quietly, what's it going to be? Victoria looked at James, then at Officer Thompson, then at all the people watching her. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change her life forever. I want to make this right, she said loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. Not just apologize, I want to actually make it right. James, you said there are children who need medical care? Families who need help? I want to help them. She turned to Officer Thompson. I know I should be arrested for what I did. I assaulted this man, and there should be consequences. But if you'll give me a chance, I'd like to turn this into something positive. I'd like to use this moment to start helping people instead of just thinking about myself. Thompson looked skeptical. This sounds like you're trying to buy your way out of trouble, Ms. Ashworth. Maybe I am, Victoria admitted honestly. But does that matter if real people get real help? James showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. The least I can do is try to pass that kindness on to others. James stepped forward. Sir, what if we made this a condition of not pressing charges? Ms. Ashworth commits to using her resources to help others, and I agree to consider the matter resolved. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, aware that his decision would be scrutinized by his superiors and possibly the media. But he was also aware that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't necessarily what the rulebook said. "Ms. Ashworth," he said finally, "if Guard Morrison is willing to not press charges, then we won't pursue criminal prosecution. But this is conditional on you following through on your commitment to help others. And if you ever cause another incident like this, anywhere in the United Kingdom, you'll face the full consequences of both this incident and any future ones." Victoria nodded eagerly. "I understand. Thank you for giving me this chance." The crowd began to disperse, many people still talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Social media posts were already spreading across the internet, with hashtags like #KindnessWins and #GuardAngel trending within hours. But James wasn't thinking about social media or public attention. He was thinking about his family, about other families who needed help, and about the unexpected opportunity that had just presented itself. "Victoria," he said as the security officers moved away, "if you're serious about this, I'd like to introduce you to some people who could use your help, starting with my sister Sarah and the children's cancer ward where she was treated." Victoria wiped her tears and nodded. "I'd like that very much. And James, thank you for seeing something good in me when I couldn't see it myself." As the changing of the guard ceremony finally resumed, with a replacement guard taking James's position temporarily, most of the tourists began to move on to other sites. But Victoria remained, standing quietly to the side, watching the precision and dignity of the ceremony with new eyes. She was beginning to understand that true honor wasn't something you could buy or demand. It was something you earned through service to others, through standing firm in your principles even when it was difficult, through showing kindness to people who might not deserve it, but desperately needed it. For the first time in 2 years, Victoria Ashworth had a purpose beyond her own entertainment. And it had all started with a man who chose compassion over anger, understanding over retaliation, and hope over judgment. 3 days later, Victoria found herself in a place she had never imagined visiting: the Children's Cancer Ward at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. She had spent the previous 2 days researching children's hospitals, reading stories of families struggling with medical bills, and learning about the reality of childhood cancer that she had never bothered to understand before. James had arranged to meet her there during his off-duty hours. He had called ahead to speak with Dr. Elizabeth Chun, the head of pediatric oncology, explaining the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Dr. Chun had been skeptical at first. Wealthy donors often came with great promises, but little understanding of what hospitals really needed. Victoria wore simple clothes for the first time in years: jeans and a plain sweater instead of designer outfits. She had left her expensive jewelry at the hotel and carried only a small purse instead of her usual collection of luxury accessories. She wanted to blend in, to focus on learning rather than being seen. When she walked into the hospital lobby, Victoria was struck immediately by the atmosphere. Unlike the luxury hotels and exclusive restaurants she usually frequented, this place hummed with genuine purpose. Doctors and nurses moved with urgent efficiency, families sat together in quiet conversation, and children played in the corner despite the serious circumstances that had brought them here. James was waiting near the information desk, dressed in civilian clothes, but still carrying himself with the same dignified posture she remembered from their first meeting. When he saw her, he smiled warmly, a genuine expression so different from the fake smiles she was used to receiving from people who wanted something from her. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I know this must be outside your comfort zone." Victoria nodded, suddenly, feeling nervous in a way that expensive restaurants and exclusive events had never made her feel. "I've never been in a children's hospital before," she admitted. "I don't really know what to expect." "Just be yourself," James replied. "The real yourself, not the person you think you're supposed to be." Dr. Chin approached them, a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She extended her hand to Victoria with professional courtesy, but obvious curiosity. "Ms. Ashworth, James has told me a bit about your situation and your interest in helping our patients," she said. "I appreciate any genuine desire to support our work, but I hope you understand that our families have been through enough without being treated as charity cases or photo opportunities." Victoria felt her cheeks redden, realizing that her reputation had preceded her. "Dr. Chun, I know you have no reason to trust me. 3 days ago, I was a completely different person, someone who probably would have treated this as a photo opportunity. But something happened that changed everything, and I'm here because I genuinely want to learn how I can help. Dr. Chen studied Victoria's face for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Let me show you around and introduce you to some of our families. But remember, these are real people facing the most difficult challenge of their lives. They deserve your respect and your genuine attention. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Chun explained the realities of pediatric cancer treatment. She spoke about the emotional toll on families, the financial stress that even insurance couldn't fully cover, and the need for long-term support that went far beyond just medical care. Many of our families exhaust their savings within the first year of treatment, Dr. Chen explained. Parents take unpaid leave to care for their children, travel expenses for specialized treatment add up quickly, and there are countless small costs that insurance doesn't cover. Special nutrition, comfortable bedding, even parking fees that become significant when you're here every day for months. Victoria listened intently, beginning to understand the complexity of problems that couldn't be solved with a single large donation. These families needed ongoing support, practical help, and, most importantly, hope that they weren't facing their challenges alone. Their first stop was the playroom, where several children of various ages were engaged in activities designed to help them cope with their treatment. James immediately went to a corner where a young girl with a bright headscarf was working on a puzzle. Her face lit up when she saw him. "James," she called out excitedly. "You came back. Did you bring the pictures from the palace?" "Of course I did, Sarah," James replied, pulling out his phone to show her photos from the changing of the guard ceremony. "And I brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is my friend Victoria." Sarah looked up at Victoria with the direct, unfiltered gaze that children possess. She was about 12 years old, with bright brown eyes that seemed much older than her years. "Are you a princess?" she asked seriously. "James works at the palace, so I thought maybe you might be a princess." Victoria knelt down to Sarah's level, feeling something shift inside her chest. "No, sweetheart, I'm not a princess. I'm just someone who's learning how to be a better person, and your friend James is teaching me." "Oh," Sarah said, considering this information. "That's good too. James is really good at teaching people things. He taught me how to be brave when the treatments hurt." Victoria glanced at James, who was watching the interaction with a gentle smile. "How do you know James?" she asked Sarah. "He's my big brother," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Well, not really my big brother, but he feels like one. He comes to visit me every week, and he always brings stories about the palace guards and pictures of the horses." Victoria felt a lump forming in her throat as she realized this was James's sister, the one he had mentioned, the one whose cancer treatment had put his family through such financial hardship. She looked at this brave little girl who was facing something no child should have to face, and felt ashamed of how she had spent her own life worrying about trivial problems. "Sarah is one of our longest-term patients," Dr. Chun explained quietly. "She's been fighting a rare form of leukemia for almost 3 years now. She's responding well to treatment, but it's been a long journey for her family." Victoria spent the next hour talking with Sarah, learning about her interests, her dreams, and her surprisingly mature perspective on her illness. "Sarah wanted to be a nurse when she grew up, so I can help other kids who are scared like I was." She talked about her parents, who took turns staying with her at the hospital, and about how hard it was for them to be away from work so much. "Daddy gets really worried about money," Sarah confided. "I hear him talking to Mummy late at night when they think I'm sleeping. He says we might have to sell our house. But James told me not to worry about things I can't control, just focus on getting better." Victoria felt her heart breaking for this family. She thought about her own problems, worrying about social media followers and designer clothes, and realized how meaningless they were compared to what Sarah and her parents were going through. When they left Sarah to continue her activities, Dr. Chen took Victoria to meet other families. There was the Martinez family, whose 8-year-old son had been diagnosed with brain cancer 6 months ago. The father had lost his job because he couldn't maintain his work schedule while caring for his son, and the mother was working double shifts as a nurse while trying to be present for treatments. There was Mrs. Thompson, a single mother whose teenage daughter was undergoing experimental treatment that required them to travel from Scotland every 2 weeks. The travel and accommodation costs were draining her savings, but the treatment wasn't available closer to home. Each family's story was different, but they all shared common threads: love, determination, financial stress, and an overwhelming need for support that went beyond just medical care. Victoria began to understand that helping these families wasn't just about writing checks, though money was certainly needed. It was about providing comprehensive support that addressed their practical, emotional, and financial needs. I had no idea, Victoria said to James as they sat in the hospital cafeteria later. I mean, I knew cancer was serious, but I never understood the ripple effect it has on entire families. The financial pressure, the emotional stress, the practical challenges of just getting through each day. James nodded. It's easy to think about illness as just a medical problem, but it affects every aspect of a family's life. My parents are still paying off loans they took out for Sarah's early treatments, even though I send them money every month to help. What do these families need most? Victoria asked. I want to help, but I want to make sure I'm helping in the right way. James thought carefully before answering. Different families need different things. Some need help with rent or mortgage payments. Others need assistance with travel costs or temporary housing when they have to come from far away. Some need practical things like special nutrition supplements or comfortable bedding for extended hospital stays. But there's something else too, he continued. These families need to feel like they're not alone, like someone cares about what happens to them beyond just their medical treatment. They need to feel human and valued, not just like patients or charity cases. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon talking with Dr. Chen about the hospital's needs and existing support programs. She learned about the gaps in coverage that left many families struggling, about waiting lists for assistance programs, and about the constant need for both financial support and volunteer time. We have families who can't afford to park here every day for months of treatment, Dr. Chen explained. We have parents sleeping in chairs because they can't afford hotel rooms, but don't want to leave their children alone. We have teenagers who are behind in school because they can't afford tutors during their treatment. As Victoria prepared to leave that evening, she stopped by the playroom one more time to say goodbye to Sarah. The little girl was reading a book, and she looked up with a smile when Victoria approached. Will you come back to visit me? Sarah asked. I like talking to you. You listen really well. I would love to come back, Victoria replied, meaning it completely. Maybe next time I can bring some books for the library here, or games for the playroom. That would be nice, Sarah said. But mostly I just like having new friends. Being sick can be lonely sometimes, and it's nice when people come to visit who aren't doctors or nurses. As Victoria walked out of the hospital with James, she felt fundamentally changed in a way that surprised her. For the first time in years, she had spent hours without thinking about herself, without checking social media, without worrying about her image or what others thought of her. James, she said as they reached the street, I want to do something significant for these families. Not just a one-time donation, but something ongoing that really makes a difference. Will you help me figure out how to do it right? James smiled, the same compassionate expression that had started this entire journey 3 days earlier outside Buckingham Palace. I think that would be exactly what these families need, he said. And I think it might be exactly what you need too. That night, Victoria sat in her luxury hotel room with a notebook and pen, making lists and plans for the first time in months. But instead of planning her next vacation or shopping trip, she was planning how to use her resources to help children like Sarah and families like the Morrisons. She was beginning to understand that the emptiness she had felt for so long hadn't been because she lacked anything. It had been because she hadn't been giving anything of real value to the world. 2 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Victoria stood in front of a room full of hospital administrators, social workers, and family advocates, presenting her proposal for the Hope Foundation, a comprehensive support program for families dealing with childhood cancer. The transformation in her appearance and demeanor was striking. Gone were the designer clothes and expensive accessories, replaced by professional but modest attire. More importantly, gone was the desperate need for attention, replaced by focused determination to make a real difference. James sat in the back of the room, wearing his dress uniform. He had taken leave from his guard duties to help Victoria develop her foundation plans, using his military organizational skills and his deep understanding of the family's needs. Over the past 2 months, they had visited dozens of hospitals, spoken with hundreds of families, and consulted with medical professionals, social workers, and other charitable organizations to understand how to create something truly effective. The Hope Foundation will provide 3 types of support, Victoria explained to the assembled group. Immediate crisis assistance for families facing financial emergencies due to their child's diagnosis, ongoing practical support for long-term treatment challenges, and emotional support programs that help both children and parents cope with the psychological aspects of serious illness. Dr. Chun, who had become an informal advisor to the foundation, nodded approvingly from the front row. Over the past weeks, she had watched Victoria transform from a wealthy tourist seeking attention into someone genuinely committed to understanding and addressing complex problems. The change had been remarkable and, Dr. Chun had to admit, inspiring. For immediate crisis assistance, Victoria continued, "We'll provide emergency grants for rent, mortgage payments, utilities, and transportation costs. No family should have to choose between keeping their home and getting their child medical care. These grants will be available within 24 hours of application, with minimal paperwork and no lengthy approval process." Mrs. Martinez, whose son Victoria had met during her first hospital visit, raised her hand. "How do you ensure families won't become dependent on these grants? We want help, not charity that makes us feel helpless." Victoria smiled, appreciating the directness of the question. "That's exactly why the Foundation's second component focuses on practical support rather than just financial assistance. We'll provide services like temporary housing for families who need to travel for treatment, tutoring for children who miss school during therapy, childcare for siblings, and job placement assistance for parents who lose employment due to caregiving responsibilities." She clicked to her next slide, which showed a detailed organizational chart. "But the third component might be the most important: emotional support programs. We'll fund counselors who specialize in childhood illness, support groups for parents and siblings, recreational therapy programs, and educational workshops that help families navigate the medical and insurance systems." James had encouraged Victoria to include this emotional support component based on his own family's experience. "When Sarah was first diagnosed," he had explained, "my parents were so focused on the medical aspects that they didn't realize how much they needed help processing their own fear and grief. They felt guilty for being scared when Sarah was the one who was sick." As Victoria presented her foundation plans, she thought about how much her understanding had deepened over the past 2 months. Her initial instinct had been to simply write large checks to existing organizations, but James and Dr. Chun had helped her understand that money alone couldn't solve the complex web of challenges these families faced. She had spent time with the Thompson family from Scotland, learning about the exhaustion of traveling for treatment every 2 weeks and the difficulty of maintaining normal life for their other children. She had stayed late into the evening with night shift nurses, understanding how the hospital felt different after dark when families were left alone with their fears. She had attended support group meetings, listening to parents share their struggles with guilt, anger, and helplessness. The Foundation will also establish hope houses near major pediatric cancer treatment centers, Victoria explained. These will provide free, home-like accommodation for families who need to travel for treatment. But they'll be more than just places to sleep. They'll have kitchens where families can prepare familiar foods, play areas where siblings can be children, and common spaces where families can connect with others going through similar experiences. The first Hope House was already under construction near Great Ormond Street Hospital, with plans for additional houses near children's hospitals in Manchester, Birmingham, and Edinburgh. Victoria had purchased the properties with her own funds, but the Foundation would handle operations and programming. After her presentation, Victoria spent time talking individually with family representatives and medical professionals. Each conversation added to her understanding of the complex needs these families faced. A social worker from Birmingham explained how families often struggled with insurance paperwork during emotional crises. A nurse from Manchester described how children worried about burdening their parents with their needs. A father from Wales talked about the guilt he felt every time he had to choose between work obligations and his daughter's appointments. Later that evening, Victoria and James sat in a small cafe near the hospital, reviewing the day's feedback and planning next steps. Their relationship had evolved from the dramatic encounter at Buckingham Palace into a genuine friendship built on shared purpose and mutual respect. "I never imagined I could feel this fulfilled," Victoria admitted as she reviewed her notes from the day's meetings. "For years, I thought happiness meant having whatever I wanted whenever I wanted it. But helping Sarah's family pay off their medical debt last month made me happier than any expensive vacation ever did." James smiled, remembering the day Victoria had quietly arranged to pay off the Morrison family's remaining loans from Sarah's early treatment. She had insisted on anonymity, not wanting the family to feel obligated or uncomfortable. "Sarah asked me yesterday if you were an angel," he said. "I told her you were just someone who learned how to use her blessings to help others." "I had to learn that from you," Victoria replied. "When you chose kindness over anger that day, when you saw something worth saving in someone who had just treated you terribly, you taught me what real strength looks like. I spent my whole life thinking power meant making people notice me, but real power is making a difference in their lives. The cafe was quiet except for the gentle murmur of other conversations and the soft clink of cups and saucers. Victoria thought about how different this moment was from her previous life. 2 months ago, her evenings were spent at exclusive restaurants or trendy nightclubs, surrounded by people who were interested in her wealth, but not in her as a person. Now she was sitting in a simple cafe with someone who had become a true friend, planning how to help families she genuinely cared about. "There's something else I want to discuss with you," Victoria said, pulling out a formal-looking document. "I've been working with lawyers to restructure my inheritance. I'm establishing a trust that will dedicate the majority of my father's wealth to the Hope Foundation and similar charitable work." James looked surprised. "Victoria, that's an enormous decision. Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. "My father left me enough money to live comfortably for several lifetimes. I don't need designer clothes and luxury vacations to be happy. In fact, those things were making me miserable. I want to use his legacy to create something meaningful, something that would make him proud if he could see it." She had spent weeks thinking about her father, trying to understand the man who had provided for her financially, but had never taught her about responsibility or purpose. "I think my father would have approved," she continued. "He built his company by solving problems and helping people communicate better through technology. The Hope Foundation is solving problems and helping families communicate with medical systems and support networks." James read through the document, impressed by the thoroughness of Victoria's planning. She wasn't making an emotional decision in the heat of the moment. She had carefully considered the implications and had created structures to ensure the foundation's long-term sustainability. "What about your lifestyle?" he asked. "You're used to a certain level of luxury." Victoria laughed, a sound much more genuine than the affected laughs James remembered from their first meeting. "I kept enough to live well, but not excessively. I realized that most of my expensive habits were just ways of filling time because I didn't have anything meaningful to do. Now I have more purpose than I can fit into a day. I don't need expensive distractions when I have genuine fulfillment." As they prepared to leave the cafe, Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. The first family had been approved for emergency assistance from the Hope Foundation. A single father whose daughter had been diagnosed with cancer and who was facing eviction because he had missed work for her treatments. Within an hour, the foundation would arrange for his rent to be paid and would connect him with the job placement services to help him find flexible employment. "One family helped," Victoria said, showing James the message. "It's a small start, but it's a real start." James nodded, thinking about all the families they had met over the past 2 months, all the children like his sister who were fighting battles no child should have to fight. "Sarah told me something yesterday that I think you'd like to hear. She said that knowing there are people like you who care about kids like her makes her feel less scared about the future." Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she had cried outside Buckingham Palace 2 months ago. Those had been tears of shame and self-pity. These were tears of gratitude and hope. "I have something to tell you too," she said as they walked toward the hospital where James was picking up his sister for a weekend visit home. "I've been thinking about that day at the palace, about what could have happened if you had responded with anger instead of compassion. I probably would have been arrested, charged with assault, and gone home angry and defensive. I would have learned nothing and helped no one." She paused, watching families coming and going from the hospital, each carrying their own stories of love and struggle. "You saved me that day, James. Not from legal consequences, but from myself. You showed me that the person I was becoming wasn't the person I had to stay. You gave me a chance to find out who I could be if I chose to be better." As they entered the hospital to collect Sarah for her weekend at home, a weekend that was possible because her latest test results showed continued improvement, Victoria reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 months ago, she had been a wealthy, lonely woman desperately seeking attention and validation from strangers. Tonight, she was someone with purpose, with genuine friendships, and with the knowledge that her life was making a real difference in the world. The transformation had been uncomfortable at times, requiring her to confront ugly truths about herself and to learn entirely new ways of thinking about success and fulfillment. But as she watched James hug his sister and saw Sarah's face light up with joy, Victoria knew that every difficult moment of growth had been worth it. She had finally found what she had been searching for all along, not attention or admiration, but the deep satisfaction that comes from using your gifts to lift others up. 1 year after the incident that changed both their lives, Victoria and James stood together in the main lobby of Great Ormond Street Hospital, watching the unveiling of a bronze plaque that read, "The Hope Foundation Family Support Center, where every child's battle is fought with love, dignity, and community support." The center represented the culmination of 12 months of tireless work, learning, and personal transformation. The crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony included hospital staff, foundation beneficiaries, volunteers, and local officials. But, for Victoria, the most important attendees were the families she had come to know over the past year. People who had become friends rather than charity cases, who had taught her more about resilience and love than she had ever taught them about hope. Sarah Morrison, now 14 and in remission, stepped up to the microphone with the confidence of someone who had faced down cancer and won. Her hair had grown back thick and curly, and her smile radiated the kind of joy that only comes from having looked death in the face and choosing life. She had insisted on speaking at the dedication ceremony, despite her parents' concerns about public speaking. "A year ago, I was just a sick kid whose family was scared about money and whether I would get better," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, I'm a kid who survived cancer, whose family got the help they needed, and who learned that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments." She looked directly at Victoria, who was trying not to cry. "Victoria, you taught me that being rich isn't about having money. It's about making other people's lives better. You showed me that being powerful isn't about getting your way, but about using your strength to help people who can't help themselves." The audience applauded, but Sarah wasn't finished. "James, you taught me something even more important. You taught me that the way we treat people who hurt us says more about who we are than how they treat us. You showed kindness to someone who was mean to you, and because of that kindness, hundreds of families are getting help they need." Victoria wiped her eyes, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The Hope Foundation had grown beyond anything she had initially imagined. They now supported over 300 families annually, operated 4 Hope houses near major children's hospitals, and had helped change policies at insurance companies and government agencies to better support families dealing with childhood illness. But the statistics, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real impact. Victoria thought about the Thompson family, who no longer had to choose between mortgage payments and their daughter's treatment. She thought about the Martinez family, who had been able to keep their other children in stable schools while their son underwent treatment. She thought about dozens of other families who had found not just financial support, but emotional community and practical assistance during the most difficult periods of their lives. Dr. Chun approached the microphone next, representing the hospital's perspective on the foundation's work. "When Victoria first came to us a year ago, I was skeptical," she admitted honestly. "We've had many wealthy donors make grand promises that turned out to be more about publicity than genuine commitment. But Victoria and James have proven that real change comes from real understanding, from taking the time to learn what families actually need rather than what we assume they need." She gestured toward the newly opened support center, which included comfortable family meeting spaces, a resource library, childcare facilities, and offices for social workers and counselors. This center represents more than just services, it represents dignity. Families using these services aren't treated as charity cases, but as valued community members deserving support during a difficult time. The support center had been designed with extensive input from families who had experienced the challenges of navigating childhood cancer treatment. Every detail, from the comfortable furniture to the quiet spaces for private conversations, had been chosen based on real needs expressed by real people. James, now serving as the Foundation's Director of Family Services, spoke about the lessons he had learned over the past year. "When I first met Victoria outside Buckingham Palace, I saw someone who was hurting and acting out because of that pain. I chose to respond with compassion rather than anger, but I had no idea that choice would lead to all of this." He paused, looking around at the families, staff, and volunteers who had become an extended community. "What I've learned this year is that every person has the capacity for good, even when they're not showing it." Victoria could have stayed angry and defensive after our encounter. Instead, she chose to learn, to grow, and to use her resources to help others. That choice has made a difference in hundreds of lives. James had taken a leave of absence from his guard duties to focus full-time on the Foundation, using his military training in logistics and organization to ensure efficient operations. His sister's experience as a cancer patient had given him unique insight into family needs, and his natural compassion had made him an effective advocate for the Foundation's mission. As the ceremony continued, Victoria reflected on the personal changes of the past year. She had sold most of her luxury possessions, keeping only what she needed for a comfortable but modest lifestyle. Her social media accounts, once filled with pictures of expensive meals and designer clothes, now documented Foundation activities and shared resources for families dealing with childhood illness. More importantly, her relationships had changed completely. The superficial friendships based on wealth and status had faded away, replaced by genuine connections with people who shared her values and commitment to service. She had learned to find joy in simple pleasures, reading to children in the hospital, helping families navigate insurance paperwork, sitting quietly with parents who just needed someone to listen. Victoria Ashworth has taught us something important about redemption, said Father Michael O'Brien, the hospital chaplain, as he offered a blessing for the new center. She has shown us that no one is beyond the possibility of change, that our worst moments can become the foundation for our best selves, and that true wealth is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we give away. After the formal ceremony, Victoria found herself in the center's family kitchen, helping to serve lunch to families and staff. It was a scene that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The former entitled tourist now wearing an apron and cheerfully dishing out sandwiches to anyone who was hungry. Mrs. Peterson, whose 8-year-old son was undergoing treatment, approached Victoria with a shy smile. "Ms. Victoria, I wanted to thank you again for helping with our hotel costs last month. Because we could stay near the hospital during Danny's surgery, I could be with him every day. It made such a difference for his recovery. Please, just call me Victoria," she replied, handing Mrs. Peterson a sandwich. "And you don't need to thank me. Helping each other is what community is supposed to be about. How is Danny doing now?" "He's doing wonderfully," Mrs. Peterson beamed. "The surgery was successful, and he starts kindergarten next month. We never thought we'd see this day when he was first diagnosed." Conversations like this happened throughout the afternoon as Victoria moved around the center, checking on various activities and services. She had learned to listen more than she talked, to ask questions that showed genuine interest rather than making assumptions about what people needed. James found her later in the center's resource library, reading a book about childhood development to a group of younger siblings whose brothers and sisters were receiving treatment. The children were absorbed in the story, and Victoria's natural warmth had won them over completely. "You're good at this," he observed quietly when the story time ended, and the children ran off to other activities. Victoria smiled, putting the book back on the shelf. "A year ago, I didn't even know I liked children. I had never spent time with any kids except my cousins at family gatherings, and those were always formal, uncomfortable occasions. But these children have taught me so much about resilience and finding joy even in difficult circumstances." She thought about Emma, a 6-year-old whose brother was in treatment and who had announced that Victoria was her book friend. Emma looked forward to story time each week and had even started writing her own stories about brave princesses who helped sick children. Victoria had been so touched by Emma's creativity that she had arranged for a local publisher to create a special edition of Emma's story to share with other children in the hospital. "I've been thinking about the future," Victoria continued as they walked through the center together. "The foundation is running well now, with excellent staff and sustainable funding. I want to expand our model to other countries. There are children and families all over the world who could benefit from this kind of comprehensive support." James nodded, not surprised by Victoria's ambitious thinking. Over the past year, he had watched her channel her natural intensity and determination into positive directions. "What did you have in mind?" "I've been talking with children's hospitals in Canada, Australia, and Germany about adapting our model to their healthcare systems," Victoria explained. "Each country has different challenges and resources, but the core needs are the same: financial support, practical assistance, and emotional community for families facing childhood illness." They paused in front of a wall covered with photographs and thank you notes from families the foundation had helped. Each image told a story of hope, resilience, and recovery. Victoria looked at a picture of Sarah Morrison from 6 months ago, healthy and smiling, holding a certificate recognizing her volunteer work with newly diagnosed children. "Sarah wants to study medicine now," Victoria said. "She's decided she wants to become a pediatric oncologist so she can help children the way her doctors helped her. She says surviving cancer taught her that she was stronger than she thought, and Now she wants to help other children discover their own strength. James smiled, proud of his sister's determination and grateful for how the experience had shaped her character. She told me she wants to work in a Hope House when she's older, providing the same kind of support she received. As the day wound down and families began heading home, Victoria and James found themselves back in the hospital's main lobby where their journey had begun with Dr. Chin 12 months earlier. The space looked different now, filled with comfortable seating, information displays about foundation services, and a small play area for children. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had responded differently that day at Buckingham Palace? Victoria asked James as they prepared to leave. James considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. If I had reacted with anger, you probably would have been arrested, and neither of us would have learned anything from the experience. Hundreds of families wouldn't have received help, and you might still be searching for something to fill the emptiness in your life. More importantly, he continued, I would have missed the opportunity to see how quickly someone can change when they're given compassion instead of judgment. You taught me something too, Victoria. You showed me that people are capable of far more growth than we usually give them credit for. Victoria nodded, thinking about all the moments over the past year when she could have given up, gone back to her old life, or settled for superficial involvement rather than deep commitment. I never thought I could be happy without luxury and attention, but helping these families has given me something money never could, a sense of purpose that gets me excited to wake up every morning. As they walked toward the exit, they passed the bronze plaque again, its words catching the late afternoon light streaming through the hospital windows. Victoria traced the engraved letters with her finger, still amazed that her name was associated with something so meaningful. Thank you, James, she said quietly, for seeing something worth saving in someone who didn't deserve your kindness. For showing me that the worst thing I ever did could become the beginning of the best thing I've ever done. James smiled, the same gentle expression that had started their unlikely friendship. Thank you for proving that people really can change, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes our greatest failures can become our greatest opportunities to help others. As they left the hospital together, Victoria thought about the journey from that humiliating moment outside Buckingham Palace to this fulfilling afternoon surrounded by families whose lives had been touched by hope. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in money but in the positive impact you could have on other people's lives. She had discovered that real power came not from demanding attention but from lifting others up. Most importantly, she had found that the love and respect she had been desperately seeking through selfish behavior had been waiting for her all along in service to others. The sun was setting over London as Victoria and James parted ways, each heading home to families who had been transformed by their year of service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, and new opportunities to demonstrate that kindness really could change the world, one person at a time.